Okay, thank you, folks, for joining us for our second to last honors colloquium, I think, for the spring 2026 semester. It's crazy how close to the end we are. But today we are very happy to be joined by one of our accounting majors in the Honors College, Madison Barth, who's going to be speaking to us on a project that she did alongside Dr. Yang Zhao, a professor of economics, called How Does Affordable Childcare Affect Female Labor Force Participation? So she's going to go ahead and present, I think, for about 15, 20 minutes, you said, and then we should have some time for questions. So take it away, Madison.
Okay, so whenever you look at this question, like the main thing you think is like, yeah, affordable childcare will make female labor force participation raise. And the reason that's like the main answer to it, but there's so much more complexity behind it. And that's what I'm going to kind of get into with this presentation. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is the biggest problem, which is the rising cost of childcare. So basically in the US, childcare costs have risen 1.5 times faster than inflation, which is already pretty high right now. And then in 32 states, which is more than half of the states in the US, have childcare that exceeds college tuition. And we all know that college tuition is pretty high in the US. And then in 41 states, which is almost all 50 states, childcare costs exceeds the average monthly mortgage, which are also pretty high. And this is a graph that kind of shows the CPI for childcare, housing, transportation, and groceries. The CPI is basically the average change in price paid by consumers for what's called like a basket of goods. And the things like childcare, housing, transportation, groceries would be those baskets. And you can see in this graph that childcare skyrockets above all of those. And we already know that like things like housing, transportation, and groceries are pretty high in our day-to-day lives. So it's pretty crazy that childcare exceeds all of those. And that's all the way up till 2022, and it's probably still increasing to now. And so next, I'm going to talk about the different types of childcare and their costs. And there are two types of childcare that I'm going to talk about. We've got home-based care and center-based care. And home-based is basically like what it sounds like. It's the childcare that's based in the home. And so this includes like nannies, babysitters, and even just family members. And then center-based care will be like your facilities, so like daycare, family care centers, stuff like that. So what I'm going to talk about is the average weekly cost that was in the years of 2024. So for a nanny, it was $827 a week, which increased to 8%. And for the babysitters, it's a little bit different. It's $167 per week, which it looks like it says it decreases. But when I looked it up online, it said that didn't like go with the national database. And what it said was that the rate of increase for babysitters, the cost of babysitters has slowed down, but its overall expense is still rising. And then we have daycare, which is $343 a week, which is 6.9% higher than 2023. And then the family care centers, which is $344 a week, which actually increased by 50%, which is pretty high. And then these next couple of slides are going to show the US, and it kind of shows the difference in prices for childcare based for infants and toddlers for the two different types. So this one is infant home-based, and you can kind of see like on the coastlines that you can see a lot more higher childcare prices. And if you look up at the top right-hand corner, it shows the amount in like 2018 dollars and 2023 dollars, and you can see that as the years go by, it definitely gets a lot higher. So with that, we can go to that's infant home-based, and then infant center-based is a lot more expensive than home-based. And you can see in the top right corner again, you can see the price has gone up. And you kind of see again on those like coastlines, you can see a definite like increase. And then we'll go to toddlers, and you can see kind of the same idea. The coastlines increase, see a little bit of increase around the United States. But you can see with toddlers, and you can kind of see the next one, for the overall price is a lot lower than infants. And for center-based, you can see it's more expensive. But for infants, it's a lot more expensive because you need constant supervision for them, almost like 24/7 supervision than toddlers. Toddlers are getting to that age where they might be like going to a pre-K or something like that, and they definitely don't need, maybe not as much, but still a good amount. And you can see Also, in terms of like the types, center-based will definitely be more expensive than home-based. And then we're going to talk about childcare costs by location. And I chose Bowie County, which is here, and then Arlington County, Virginia. And the reason I chose Arlington County, Virginia is because it is one of the most expensive places in the US for childcare. And I looked it up, and actually the reason they said that the higher cost or high cost of other items drives up the fixed costs of childcare providers, which then like drives up the fees they have to charge to others. So that is why it's very high. You can definitely see a big difference between Bowie County and Arlington County. So you can see that childcare definitely varies by location. And then you can kind of see, like as before, the idea with the map, you can see that infant care is a lot more expensive than toddler care. And then you can also see the center care is much more expensive than the home care. Okay. And then we're going to talk about female labor force participation. So I'm just going to define what labor force participation rate is. It is basically the percent of the population that is of working age and then who is unemployed and employed. When we say unemployed, it doesn't necessarily mean like they're completely not looking for a job. It means that they're actively looking for a job, but just not having one at the moment. And then this shows a kind of graph for the historical trends of the women's labor force participation. And you can see over the years from 1950, it has gradually increased. And you can kind of see a dip right there. And that was probably because of the pandemic. But after that, it's still going to gradually rise. And then the women's labor force participation based on education is pretty self-explanatory. Basically, the higher education you have, the higher labor force participation. Basically, that's because if you have a higher degree plan, you're going to go out and get more job opportunities and have more jobs to look for, stuff like that.
Can I ask a real question, a quick question before we start? What is that y-axis? What are the numbers represent? That's what I'm asking.
That is the y-axis right there is going to be the labor force like rate, I would say, and then the x is just showing the different kinds. So like it's showing the average labor force participation rate. So like less than high school would be average like 45%, and then high school 56 and stuff like that. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the labor force participation based on marital status. So unmarried women are going to have higher rates than married women. And the reason behind this is because unmarried women typically have like a financial necessity to go out and work because they tend to rely on their own income other than like somebody else's. So, and they also have more independence to do so as well. And then married women, it kind of goes back into like that traditional role that some households may still have where they kind of have like the women at home taking care of the kids and stuff like that. But I think the main reason that married women might have the lower labor force participation rates is definitely because of childcare. Because most of the time, if they have a child, they're trying to find the best affordable option, and sometimes that's not available. So they end up opting out to cutting their work hours or just all out going out of the workforce just to take care of their kids. And then this is kind of a graph that shows mothers versus non-mothers. So you can see for women who have no children, they have a much higher labor force participation rate, especially for mothers who have kids under 5. And that goes back again to like taking care of the toddlers and the infants where they have a lot more supervision. Like, because women with no children, again, have that independence, so they can go out. And then you can also see there's a pretty high labor force for women who have like teenage kids, 13 to 18, and that's most likely because for one, they are more independent, they can go to school, so they have more time to actually go out and maybe work for like the time frame, and then they won't have to worry about the constant supervision. And then we got another graph that shows the labor force participation by the age of the youngest child. So you can see in the red, it shows the labor force participation of women who have children under the age of 3. So that's still a toddler and infants, which kind of again goes back to the supervision kind of idea. And then you can see that dark blue is for women who have children 6 to 17. Again, it's like they're going to school. They don't need that constant supervision like a toddler or okay. And then we've got labor force participation by race and ethnicity. And what I'm going to kind of highlight is the two that kind of are the most and then the least. So Black mothers tend to have the highest labor force participation rates, and there are many reasons why, but I found some main ones that they have societal expectations of gainful employment, and they also are affected by labor market discrimination that Black men face, and this causes them to have like lower wages, less stability, and because of that discrimination and those issues, they tend to become financial contributors for their families, and they will literally like become just like they could become the sole breadwinner of the house or co-breadwinner. So they end up having to work out of like necessity, basically. And then for Hispanic mothers, they tend to have the lowest. And this is because of things like their family structure, their educational attainment, immigration status, and even English proficiency, which can cause a lot of barriers in that, and finding a job that's stable. And you can kind of see for whites in the pink areas for children under 5, and then children for 6 to 17 is dark blue. And you can kind of see again the difference between like a younger child and an older child, how that affects the mother's labor force participation rates. And then now we're going to answer the main question of how affordable childcare impacts the female labor force participation. So first, it boosts the mother's economic and social empowerment. So this is shown by allowing them to increase their work hours. They can go from part-time to full-time work, and that'll increase their overall income. And it'll enable them to have career advancements. So they can pursue more promotions, they can go into new career fields. And even I remember when I did my first research, I talked about how there are women-owned businesses. So mothers who have those types of businesses can typically go and take more time into it and kind of build up their career in that. And then also reduces stress and relieves that financial burden and extensive search for childcare options that many mothers face families. And then next, it releases these many financial boundaries. So women, their mothers will be able to stop sacrificing their work. They won't have to choose between their career and the childcare. They'll also have support for low-income families. Middle and low-income families will have less stress on the financial needs for childcare. And then it'll increase their family income. So having 2 dual income households will become more feasible. And it'll aid those vulnerable groups with the race and ethnicity groups that were having issues having lower labor force participation because of things like that, the childcare. And then next is going to narrow the gender gap. There's 2 gender gaps. There's the childcare responsibility gap and the wage disparity gap that I'm talk about. So with the childcare responsibility gap, traditionally it talks about the traditional ideas on how women were seen to be like house workers. They took care of the kids in the house while the husbands went out and worked. But nowadays women have more financial or workforce independence. So having that affordable childcare can balance those responsibilities between the 2. And then we have the wage disparity gap. And this is seen whenever women lose out on earnings, reduce their work hours, lose career advancement opportunities, and they have inconsistent scheduling due to those childcare demands. And a lot of the times they're penalized for missing work. So having the affordable childcare can definitely narrow that as well. And then we're going to look at some local and international examples. So first we have Kenya and China. So Kenya, they had an 8.5% increase when women were offered free vouchers for childcare ages 1 to 3. So they were able to go and work more. And then in China, they provide a lot of tax incentives, housing subsidies, and free or subsidized education for having a 3rd child, which increases their birth rates and improve that childcare accessibility. And so the ways to improve childcare, the first thing is to improve the worker conditions. So a lot of the times, many childcare workers believe that the wages they earn are not really equal to the amount of work that they do. So increasing their wages can provide more workers to come in. And then we can also provide them better benefits. A lot of times they might receive none to little benefits. So having those can bring a more incentive to have more childcare workers come back and come into the field, and then professional development as well. And then we can invest in programs, things like Head Start, childcare services, federal CCDF funding, and we can push for policies by voting, calling representatives, peaceful protesting, and get things like Childcare for Working Families Act, Universal Pre-K, and tax credits. And then, so the key takeaways is that childcare costs are rising faster than inflation, and this creates a lot of issues and barriers for working mothers. And then the women's labor force participation varies significantly by those subgroups like education, marital status, and age of the youngest children. And then affordable childcare and boosts their economic empowerment, increases those financial boundaries, and narrows those two gender gaps. And then the global examples support the idea that childcare support will increase women's employment. And then finally, policy changes and program investments can improve childcare accessibility greatly. And so thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Madison. All right, questions? I've got a couple, but I'll defer. Anyone has any? Might be one in the chat. I don't know. That probably is just that coming either here.
What
Oh,
made you
it's good.
choose this topic?
Yeah, why did you choose it?
It was in a list, and there were two. I'm not trying to be funny, but there were two, and it was either talking about called the gender wage gaps kind of before, and then this one. And when I kind of did a little bit of extra research behind it, I found it very interesting. And then you don't really hear a lot about this either, unless you're actually a mother, so actually finding out about how it affects a lot of things women have to deal with. It's pretty interesting.
I had a question on the sort of the data generated aspect of it. Maybe Jay. I noticed on the map that there was a number of a couple of states that didn't have any, like Missouri and Indiana, and then there were a few counties kind of kicking around. Is that like a Bureau of Labor Statistics thing, or is it up to the state, or do we know why some of them just don't have any?
I feel like maybe they kind of think, because I remember seeing that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that I'm assuming it's by state, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's by county too, so it's kind of just. I think it might have not been collected or something. I would say I can't remember what it said, but it's just yeah.
I don't think that's the data availability. That's because they collected through the Women's Bureau. The Women's Bureau sent out surveys such as the labor market price, child price. I think normally that's for maybe childcare center they didn't send it back, or they don't have enough supervision. Yes.
Yeah.
So some states don't have enough data.
And one other question, a bit of a catch-22 of policy sort of recommendations. I certainly agree that child care workers and almost any care workers don't get paid enough for what they do. But how do we get around the fact that if we're going to increase wages and benefits and professional development, that's going to presumably just push up the already problematic aspect of child care costs, right? So is there a way around that, or is it essentially just open for more subsidies from the government?
I feel like with what I was kind of thinking with like improving the wages and the benefits, I feel like that would bring a lot more people into the field itself, kind of, if that makes sense. Like it will allow people to be like, hey, maybe this is something, because a lot of times many childcare workers, from what I researched, they leave the field because they don't have any benefits, they don't have a lot of good wages. So you can see that's kind of like an incentive. Like I said, it's kind of going to bring more people into that field if they're interested in it.
I like the question you raised because a lot of subsidies is being subsidized for the demand side, such as CCD tax credits that go to parents, right? So to encourage more parents sending their kids to daycare center, but we don't have enough supply providers. So that's something I talked to a couple of providers and in time, and they said, well, we are leaving this industry because we don't see any hope for us. We don't see the career projection.
Right.
So I think that's one of the reasons. I think if the government wants to sponsor or subsidize the supply side of the market, we should do more.
Yeah. I guess increasing supply would presumably moderate costs aggregate. Yeah, that's interesting. Any other questions?
I've got a question. Can I see the line graph that shows the rate of people in the workforce?
Is it this one?
I think so. Yeah. Wait. Yeah, can you move the?
Yeah, move the Zoom thing on the side.
I just want to see the most recent ones before I ask a question.
There we go.
Okay, so that's what I found. Prices, cost for childcare have increased, but it also looks like the labor force is increasing. So they're positively correlated, right? Meaning that as costs increase, there's more people entering, more women entering the labor force. Why would that be?
Oh, the last few years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's interesting.
I can see.
It's just kind of interesting because it's completely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have a suspicion, but it's just me. Would it make any sense if, 'cause you're right, it's kind of, it both supports and undermines the argument that the idea is if the costs are increasing, are more women going to be pushed into going to work, which would positively correlate to the labor force. But if you reduce the costs, yeah. Fun. I have no answer on it yet, Madison May. I don't know.
It's a complicated
Yeah.
question.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah, I see a correlation between this labor force and also for the rise in childcare. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, in that case, I'll say thank you to Madison again. Well done. Good stuff. And we will reconvene in a couple of weeks, I think. April 17th is going to be our last honors colloquium of the spring semester. That'll be Dr. Hannah Jones, who's going to be speaking to us on some of her research in medieval Europe. And after that, yeah, that's essentially it for honors events, at least during the day. But thank you very much. We'll get this posted up on YouTube so we can go back and watch it again. And yeah, thank you guys. Take care. Thank you, Zoom guy. Good job.
Yeah.
So, interesting.